Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is my first in a series of videos on Ruby on Rails. So basically we're going to walk through how to do project with Ruby on Rails. I'm not going to walk through how to install Ruby. You need to go install Ruby. Okay, once you install Ruby, a couple of things you do need. You also need Yarn. Okay, if not, you'll run into some problems working with Rails. Okay, so make sure that you have the right version of Yarn. So let's see here. I think it's the dash version. Okay, so that's the version of Yarn that I'm currently running. If you have like some really old version like 0.34 or something like that, that won't work either. That'll run into problems too. So make sure you're installing a recent version of Yarn. Okay. Now basically what's going to happen is that once you've installed Ruby, you're going to have access to this ability to install things using the gem command, which is essentially the way that Ruby handles package management, kind of like Node with Node Manager. Technically, gem and gem files were kind of like the precursor to a lot of that. But essentially what's going to happen is that you're going to install Rails. So you'd be doing like gem install Rails. Okay, so you're going to make sure you install Rails. Okay. And then make sure that you have it. So Rails-v should give you the version of Rails that you're currently running. I'm running Rails 6.032 for this tutorial set, so keep that in mind. There are changes from older versions of Rails that you might see in older tutorials, so keep in mind I'm using Rails 6. Cool, and I might as well just give you my Ruby version while I'm at it too, so that way you have all those details. And Ruby I'm using 2.65. Okay, cool. So now that we know that, we're going to create... So once you have all that installed, then you can create a new Ruby project. Okay, if you don't have Yarn installed, it's going to create some issues. If you don't have Ruby installed, it's not going to work. And then if you don't have Rails installed, then you can't run the Rails command. So then I'm going to go Rails, new, and then create a name of our project. And we're going to call this our practice project. So Rails, new practice, and that's going to kind of start up a new project, which will take forever to start up. Okay, so let's just make sure it's going. Rails can initialize new Rails application in the directory with it. Oh, I'm still inside of another one. So let's see here. CD back into my parent folder. Run that command again. Rails new practice. Okay, and there it goes. It starts creating a new one, practice. But I have one that's kind of already spun up called demo. So while that one kind of gets kick-started, what we're going to do is I'm going to just kind of walk you through the file structure. Okay, so again, this is actually kind of like the OG batteries included framework. Okay, so there's a lot of files going on here. And again, it's been improved a lot since its original versions, but I mean, this was like the original framework that would handle like database migrations for you, views, kind of had everything kind of bundled in together in a way that you didn't have to really think about a lot of things. Now, basically, lots of frameworks across every language are kind of borrow from the ideas that Rails brought to the table, whether it's Django for Python, Laravel for PHP, Buffalo for Go. I know there's several different frameworks that try. Off the top of my head, I think like Foals TS or Nest.js, Sails. And then for the Groovy programming language, there's a framework called Grails. So there's lots of people who kind of borrow from the legacy of Ruby on Rails. It's not the only framework in Ruby. There's other ones like Sinatra, but this is by far the most popular. It's probably the biggest reason most people learn Ruby to work in Ruby on Rails. So it's the killer application of Ruby. But anyways, back to the file structure. So when you spin up a new project, basically you're gonna have this app folder. This app folder is gonna have assets, which we'll come back to. This is just basically your static assets. Channels that I haven't really needed. Controllers, this is going to be where you specify your controllers. Okay, so essentially the way they handle routes here is a little bit different. You have your controllers, which is going to define the different sort of potential views, or basically how different routes get handled. Okay, so essentially think of it as like if I go to test / whatever, these are the different like views or routes under this controller. Okay, so it's the hello controller, and this defines all the routes under the hello controller. We'll kind of show you an example of that in a second. So that's controllers, helpers, JavaScript jobs, models. This is where we'll define models later on. That'll probably not be covered in this particular video. Views is where you'll actually find all the views. So essentially when you create a controller, it'll create the controller file, and it's going to create a corresponding views file. Okay, so basically the person's controller here is going to match up with the person's folder and views. So basically this new controller here, so again you're defining a bunch of functions under the controller new, it's going to by default look in this views folder and look for new.html.erb, which is the templating file, embedded Ruby something something. Okay, so there's that, and looks like our project has completed setting up. Okay, so let's see here. So let me go into that folder. So the folder for our particular project, CD practice. So this is our fresh project. So you can see here when I open up this one doesn't have all the controllers that I built out in the other one yet and stuff. Okay. So let me clear my terminal. And once you're inside Rails, again, all the commands always start with like Rails. So if you want to run the server, you just do Rails server, and that's actually going to kickstart your Ruby on Rails server. Okay, so that way you can see the dev version of the website. It's a dev server, okay, not for deployment. Okay, so run Rails server help, booting, Rails application starting development. I think it's not started up yet. It's building it. Okay, and then we'll be able to actually kind of visit the website and default support 3000. But let's keep going through the folder structure while we're at it. Up there, it's up. So let's go to here. Let's refresh. Well, none of that exists yet. Localhost 3000. So if I go to local, yay, you're on Rails. So this is like sort of the intro page for Rails. So always the first thing you want to learn is just how to make some basic routes. So I'm going to kill the server. Okay, and basically what you can do is you can always just generate stuff by using Rails generate whatever. So in this case I want to generate a controller. So we're just going to call this controller routes, controller more routes. Okay. So that's going to generate a controller called more routes. And it's generally always Rails generate a model, Rails generate whatever you can think of. Okay, it takes a second, then it's going to give me a list of the files it created, or give me an error of some sort. Nope. It's just doing the thing. There it goes. Nope, still doing the thing. Let me just see if it started building it out. So let's see here. Let's go to controllers. Do I see? Nope, didn't build it out yet. When it's done, it should end up with a thing here. There it goes. There, it's created the files. Good. So now it created this controller file. Okay, and now we see more routes controller. Cool. So what we need to do is we can define some endpoints. So we can do like def cheese end. Just do that as an example. Okay. And I can just do this. I can do def hello end, because again, this is how you do functions in Ruby. Cool. And this is a class. So this is a class, and these are the functions that define in the class. They're just empty functions. It just basically, this is how Ruby knows that when it sees this, so when it sees more routes / cheese, it's going to go to the views folder and look for this folder, more routes. And then we're going to create some new files. cheese.html.erb. Okay, I'm just going to put in h1 cheese. Okay, then we'll put another one, new file. What was it? Hello. New file hello.html.erb. And that one will just have an h1 hello. Cool. So that's that. Now, the thing is that it still doesn't know that this route exists to go look at this controller, to go look at these views. So that's going to be in our config folder. There's a file called routes, which this is kind of I mean, I guess think of it like the URLs file. So you have your views folder, you know, in Django, and then you have your views folder, although this one's like 3 steps. So routes. Okay, so this is our routes folder, and we need to map that over. Right now the exact syntax is escaping me, so I'm going to look at my example one that I did earlier. Okay, here we go. Get hello index, and that just basically means go get that one. Okay, cool. So let's just go back to here. We're not there. Where's my other routes? It's gonna be back in the other project. Routes for this project. Good. We'll just do some examples. So we're gonna make it a get route, and this get route will be index. No, not index. What did we call it? It was more routes slash hello. Actually, I do want to refer to the other routes again, just to be 100% sure. Hello index. Let me just make sure that that's the way I can remember it. So in that file, we had in our app, we had views, hello, and there was just index. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, good. Get more routes hello, and let me just make sure that's what we called it here. Let me just close this project here, and more routes. Okay, more routes hello, and we'll just do a separate one. Control C. More routes cheese. Okay, let's see. Well, that should automatically save. So now I'm going to start with the server again, see if it all works. Cool. It should be running just a second. Okay, waiting. Okay, cool. Back to this file here. So then we should be able to go to more routes, and then go to hello. And let's see if that works the way we expect it to work. So we should see hello on the screen in just a second. It's taking its sweet time. Is the server running? Server's running. Okay, I think you just finished it. Yep, and there it goes. Hello. And I go the cheese. And goes the cheese. And just so you can kind of see how this works, again, basically it's the controller and then the individual function in that controller. That's kind of how it initially maps the routes. Unless you could override that, but that's essentially its default behavior. So when you create a controller, again, the controller is going to be a class, like it's generated in this controllers folder, and then each function is essentially an endpoint in that. And you're able to do more stuff in the function if needed. And then by default, it'll route that. So basically, if it's just an empty function, it's going to look for a template, okay, in here. it'll look in the views folder for a folder by the name of the controller. So in this case, more routes, and then run the files that are appropriate. And then in our routes file, routes.rb, we just have to kind of specify the routes. Like it's a get route, and essentially the endpoint is more routes hello, get point, etc., etc., etc. Okay, there's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more to do in Ruby on Rails. This is just an introduction. In the coming videos, we'll do stuff like learning how to do database migrations and being able to generate a lot of routes at the same time by using resources. You guys saw me do that in my Go Buffalo video. But I'll see you guys there. Have a great one, and ciao.